I tend to think that every complex system ultimately develops a mind. So this is not just the gut microbiome, but the microbiome on the planet, because there's microbes everywhere. It's the most abundant life form. And we are connected in some ways. Our microbes in the gut are connected to the microbes in the soil, microbes in the air, in the water. Does that system have a mind? So coming back to this concept of interconnectedness.
I think you gotta have a dream.
The School of Greatness.
Really? Yeah.
Please welcome Lewis Howes.
In your studies, what are the biggest triggers for inflammation in the body? Is it environment? Is it what we consume? Is it toxins on our body that we're putting on ourselves? Is it stress hormones? What are these biggest triggers for inflammation?
Well, I mean, you listed them all. So okay. I mean, so the way the body works, it integrates influences from multiple sources, particularly the central nervous system, the brain, and it's sort of like this supercomputer applying artificial intelligence to these influences, and then it extracts patterns and decides on relevance and salience, and based on that salience, it makes responses. In terms of this needs to be, we need to adjust this system, we need to adjust this system. And it's doing obviously a phenomenal job because a lot of the influences that we're exposed to, the brain in evolution has never encountered. The chemicals, the kind of food that we eat, humans never were exposed to that kind of food. The visual experiences, the brain, and the brain-gut system, because I really always like to keep those together, and we can talk about this later, why, is a master in this, in this computation of salience and responding to it. Mm-hmm. And that system has worked so well that it's kept us alive as a species, and we're thriving. I'm not sure what's happening now. The salience. There's some sort of a mismatch now between the salience assessment and what's good for us on the planet, but there will be corrections in that as well, I'm sure.
Right. Now, do you think is the brain influencing the body more, or is the gut influencing the brain more?
So you could, I've compared this to a central government and local governments in the states and counties, and there's a lot of influence that comes from the body, and that plays a big role in our emotions, emotional states. And as I'll talk about, there's a lot of stuff now going on with this low-grade immune system activation that most people are now exposed to because of our diet, and that's a stream of information that constantly goes to the brain. Mm-hmm. You don't feel it. You don't. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't generate any symptoms. But over time, it does change your brain structurally and functionally. So a big influence subliminally that goes to the brain all the time. And also a big thing. So people have said, we can't. Yes, we can generate artificial intelligence, but it won't have emotions because it doesn't have the body to send this constant signals to it. But then on the other hand, the brain is obviously the most sophisticated computer in the universe up to now. And it sends signals to the body all the time. There's a part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system that reaches pretty much every cell in your body. You have a sensory part, the vagus nerve, that reports anything that goes on anywhere constantly to the brain. And then the brain has a system to respond to that. And again, it can influence every cell in distinct patterns. It doesn't always kick in because they would be overwhelmed. It kicks in when it's necessary, when there's a threat or when it's,
I'm curious about, I don't know if you've studied this, but I'm curious about when human beings look themselves in the mirror and they see themselves, and they shape an identity, they perceive an identity. And maybe they look chiseled. They're like this Greek god that's just chiseled. They're athletic, but they don't believe they're healthy or fit for whatever reason. Their identity has made them look like they don't love themselves, or they don't believe that they look good, or whatever it is. Is there anything to play around identity that we shape for ourselves? the image of ourselves and it making us either healthier or more susceptible to diseases or a weakened immune system? Am I out there too much by asking this? But I'm curious.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, this is definitely something that happens a lot. I mean, to a lot of people, that their identity it's obviously shaped early on in life. You know, typically, there could also be genetic factors, but most of it will happen early in life. The feedback you get from your parents and from your friends, if that's generally positive or negative. If it's negative, you know, you can have two effects. One is it can really damage your self-identity and your self-worth, or you could rebel against it and say, I'm not going to accept this. You know, I'm creating my own identity. I think it will have, almost certainly, it does have, I mean, anything that happens in the brain in terms of these emotional, identity. Like in my own research, I've always been more concerned about the emotional influences on the body. So any emotion that you experience, either chronically or so more of these emotions that are present all the time, background emotions, that has a mirror image in your body.
Really? So give me an example. If you're feeling an emotion of not enough, or lack, or sick, or stress, if you're feeling and thinking that consistently, then the body will mirror that?
The body will mirror it, and so I focus primarily on the gut, you know, because it's a kind of a unique organ because it has all these other things in it, not just the gut wall, but the immune system and the nervous system of the gut and hormonal system. But so this is not separate, you know, this is like, just as some people, you look at them and you look at their face and you can tell what's going on, you know, if you're good in that. The furrows between your eyebrows and, you know, it's unless you're a poker player, you exhibit these emotions in your face. But the same thing happens in every part of your body, you know, your heart and I'm not sure about organs like, you know, like the kidneys and the liver. They're not sort of more mechanical devices or chemical devices, not as much these computational as, so the heart is basically a pump, and, you know, but the gut is something that is in a different realm, you know, it very sensitive to emotions. And I would say
the gut is that why you feel butterflies, you feel sick when you see something, you feel it in your gut?
Yeah, and also this self-identity. I'm, you know, quite honestly, before you ask the question, I never even thought about this, but I'm absolutely convinced.
I'm fascinated by this.
I'm absolutely convinced that your gut has a mirror image of your sense of identity.
Really?
Yeah. I think if you have an inferiority complex, that will affect the gut. And now, you know, since we talked a lot about the gut microbiome that lives inside the gut, which communicates very closely with the gut, even that system gets these messages, you know, from the brain. And this is different. So if you are threatened by a wild animal, you will have a peak in your stress response, and within a couple of seconds or minutes, it will go down and, you know, be normal again. With these background emotions, or something like a sense of identity, that's with you all the time. You know,
always. You're always thinking and feeling like I'm not enough, or imposter syndrome or something.
And it's ingrained in your unconscious. You know, it comes out in your dreams.
So what does that do to the body or the immune system if you're kind of constantly thinking these things, or have a belief system that I'm not enough, or comparing to someone else or something else, or in lack or in scarcity? What does that do to the immune system, the gut, the body?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the immune system. If you have this, you know, I talked about this acute threat, or this acute emotion of an acute stress, it will temporarily increase the activity of your immune system, because
like spike up cortisol or something.
Of your stress system.
Gotcha.
But if it's chronic, it has a totally different effect on it. So often the opposite effect, and it will. I mean, there's many studies coming out on this now. You know that even early adverse life events that play a big role in shaping this identity have been found to have an effect on the gene expression pattern in your immune cells, in some of your immune cells, which in an adult person. So there's a memory in these immune cells,
Wow.
that reflects what happened to you at the age of,
5, 7,
Yeah,
9,
yeah.
whatever.
And that obviously shapes, when these immune cells are called into action, that shapes the immune response.
There's a trigger that you'll feel when you see something
Yeah.
that reflects what you went through,
Yeah.
right?
So there's a memory, there's an immune memory. I mean, there's clearly also this brain memory in our unconscious. It's probably the way the body is organized that some of the systems, particularly the nervous system and immune system, can form these memories that then later really influence many functions in your body and also your behavior.
So how do we heal these things if we have this memory of something from the past in our immune system or in our DNA and our cells? How do we heal or move beyond it so it doesn't hold us back?
Well, there's different ways. There's some people that do this on their own. They pull themselves out of it. There's other people that go into psychoanalysis. So I mentioned in my first book, I went through Jungian dream analysis for several years at some point in my life during sort of an existential crisis, and found that extremely helpful, connecting to, just watching your dreams for a while and realize some are recurring. Those are the ones that obviously have a big influence on because they're there all the time. And so if you imagine every night, these experiences are recalled, and even during your sleep affect, systems within your body. So that's another way. There's ways today, cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't deal with the roots of it. They just change your behavior. It's another way of dealing with it. So forget about reversing or patching up what happened early on. And then there's the most modern way, it's the psychedelics. I'm not an expert on this, but I've gotten really interested in that for a variety of reasons, because when I first came to UCLA for training, I was fascinated by this whole counterculture. There were workshops in Esalen and organized by the Ojai Foundation. And I listened to many of these leading figures at the time, giving these workshops. And so this was in the early 70s, and they, early 80s, I'd say, when I experienced it. And they talked about, psychoanalysis with LSD or with ketamine, and then it was completely, closed off for science for decades, and now it's coming back, rapidly, and there's some fascinating stuff coming out. And also in my travels during college in South America, I've stayed with some of these tribes on the Orinoco River, and they use, the same substance, similar substance to what's in ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And we've seen, how they get into these trance states. And so now, fast forward 35, 40 years, I find it fascinating that this is now back in the mainstream, and it will. So this is just a way of removing the control, if you say it in a simplistic way, removing the control that we have about prefrontal cortex to suppress these things. You loosen that control, and then this stuff will bubble up, maybe very painful. I think you shouldn't do it without the guidance of an experienced, shaman or psychotherapist. But that's another way of processing. And now the majority of people go through life without ever dealing with this. They get sick, they get their heart attack, their diabetes. They never think about this, So it's
Wow. I'm curious about the gut. When you say the gut, what is included in that? What are all the elements of gut?
Yeah, so let's start with, when I went to medical school, the gut was basically the digestive organ.
The digestive organ.
So something that we know very well, from the esophagus to the stomach to small intestine, large intestine. Each of those regions has a special task. And the ultimate goal, we thought, is the breaking down of food into absorbable components that are then provide the nutrients for our body. That was the thought. But then, when I came to UCLA initially as a research fellow, worked in a lab, late John Walsh, and so they found at the time that there were molecules in the gut that somewhat didn't fit that description. There were neurotransmitters, and so make a long story short.
Transmitters from the brain to the gut.
Same molecules. There's
Yes.
and the receptors, and then people thought about why is that, and it was the discovery of a nervous system in the gut. 150 million neurons. That are there, and very similar in their
150 million neurons in the gut.
in the gut, sandwiched. So if you look at a gut, you wouldn't see it. Gut has several layers, and in between these layers, there's a net of nerve cells that wraps around it. But because the gut is so long, it adds up with the numbers. And the main function of that system is really to completely regulate the gut. In an animal model, you can take out the gut, put it in a test tube, and this gut will still have the same functions, peristalsis and secretion, as it has when it's connected to the rest of the body.
You can put it in a tube and it'll still process food. It'll still
yeah.
run it through the same way.
Yeah.
So what does that tell us?
So that tells us that gut, or this little gut in the brain, is really the primary regulator of our gut functions, the digestive functions. But then there was another sort of realization that these same transmitters were also present within the brain, as in the gut. That caused a lot of surprise, that why would you have that? Then again, the long story, in evolution, we started out, the most primitive organisms, with that gut brain. And then gradually, as animals, this was marine creatures, tiny marine creatures in the oceans. As in evolution, polar animals developed with a head, then some of these nerves migrated to the head and formed, the beginning of the central nervous system. And then there was some division of labor at some point that before the gut brain did everything, because there was no head and no other functions, no other organs. So later, our big brains then took over the regulation, the response to the environment, the coordination of organs within the body, and the digestive side was left to the brain in the gut, the enteric nervous system. But that means there's a very intimate relationship between these two, more than with any other organ in the body. Clearly the heart gets a lot of signals from the brain when we're stressed, or the blood vessels, the blood pressure goes up. But it's nothing compared to what goes on in this multi-lane highway between the brain and the gut.
Really?
I would say, so a lot of people then think, our emotions processed by the gut's nervous system, or that's very not the case. I think there's still the more sophisticated things happen at the brain level.
Okay.
But there's this constant signal, in a bidirectional way that.
Like when we see something, we feel triggered, or we see a threat, or see something we like or we don't like, and then we feel it in our gut. Is it first processed through the eyes into the brain and then connects down to the gut? Or do we see something and it goes from the gut up to the brain?
No, I would say this happens first in the brain, and within milliseconds, there's a signal down.
Instant, right?
And as you said, it can be good or bad, this arousal mechanism.
Yeah, it can be pleasure or pain or stress, right?
Yeah, it can be, you go on your first date and you have people talk about butterflies in their stomach. And it can be when you have to give a speech the first time.
Yeah, and you're nervous.
Or an actor, so it's the same mechanism. It's value neutral, that arousal. But then there's also emotion-specific signals, that happen. So anger, anxiety, we don't know about something like jealousy. That hasn't really been studied, but anger and fear, that has been studied. We know exactly the patterns that happen in every level of the gut when you have these emotions. And one of the reasons that these emotions then hang around for a long time, it's not like you can turn them off. Anger, so some people train themselves, to have more equanimity and not get carried away by the anger. But a lot of people, that anger sticks with them, or the fear, and then that's because it reverberates in these gut circuits,
really,
and between the gut and the brain, and it sets up this vicious cycle. And the brain cannot easily shut it off unless you train yourself to do it.
How do you train yourself to let go of anger?
Well, it's a lot of the meditative techniques of mindfulness that you.
It's the practice. It doesn't happen overnight. It's like a practice of doing it over and over.
It's the practice. You experience that emotion and you train yourself to let it go. To see it float away.
Yeah, not hold on to it.
No, not
you studied Buddhism for a while as well, right? Or are you?
Yeah, and this is something I've always been fascinated by. Looking back, I don't even know why I was interested. It's probably my own personal issues, but that stuck with me, that interest, and I find now more than ever the wisdom that is in these Buddhist concepts, both in terms of emotional regulation. I mean, who would have thought that mindfulness-based stress reduction would become a commonly used, like a household name, or an app.
Well, yeah,
exactly. When I was first interested, it was an esoteric thing. People say, it's crazy, Buddhism. And
in the last decade, it's become the mainstream, mindfulness meditation.
And that all has to do with these concepts that we just talked about, to train yourself not to be stuck with these emotions. Because these emotions that if they hang around, as we now said several times, it's not just within your brain. They circulate through your body and
the whole body is affected.
The whole body, and it has it's a very unhealthy situation to be in that state.
Now, I've been studying a lot of breath work over the last 4 or 5 years. I was studying, to become a meditation instructor in India. Then I've been learning from Wim Hof. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Wim Hof and his practices. There's the yoga practices in general of breath work. How much connection is there between the way we breathe, the style of breathing, the shortness or the length and the calmness, the intensity of breathing in affecting the immune system and the gut-brain connection? Is there science around breath? Yeah,
there's a science, and I have to admit I'm not an expert on the various techniques that people have been using. So we've been using in our work the simplest form, the abdominal breathing, or diaphragmatic breathing, where you basically just switch from your typical adult pattern. So if you have 10 people and you tell them take a deep breath, they all take it into their chest.
Yes.
This is the and to switch that pattern to inhaling into your body, into your stomach, does wonders. And the reason it is because the diaphragm is closely connected and the lung closely connected to the vagus nerve with the brain, with these emotional centers within the brain. So if you're stressed and you consciously now tell your diaphragm to go into a pattern that is associated with relaxation, the body sends signals to the brain now that are incompatible with the stress perception. And if you are good in doing this, train yourself, then you will be able to overcome it quickly, And
really?
So I've been doing this again, you asked me why I started these things. I mean, I had some issues when I was younger where I thought this was, somebody taught me, a psychologist taught me this, and I've been practicing this for 60 years, I do it in the car, if I have to give a talk, in the car and I've gotten so good in it that within seconds I can switch it, So
what is the practice?
Yeah, the initial practice is you just, spend like 15 minutes 3 times a day lying down and breathing and counting your breaths, and then combining it with the mindfulness practice, that anytime you exhale, you let the negative emotions of anxiety go, and the only focus is on your breath and nothing else. You clear your mind of any distracting thoughts, and then if you do this long enough, it takes you a second to do this, and you feel the warmth in your stomach. It's an interesting thing. So it comes back to the gut. So what happens, when you do this, and why does you get this? Why do you get this feeling of warmth and relaxation in your abdomen,
and then it sends signals to the brain. It sends signals
to the brain, and it forces the brain to change,
to shift.
The only humans that do this spontaneously are young kids, infants. If you watch, a child, they breathe into their belly spontaneously.
Automatically.
Yeah. And with becoming a teenager and being adult, it switches to the chest.
Why is that? Why do we shift from our natural state to an unnatural state?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We don't teach our children that. It's something that happens. Maybe because as an adult we go into a more stressful confrontational interaction with the world. I also can answer this question if you ask me, do women breathe more through their belly than men do? My guess would be yes. But, because women are generally more in touch with their emotional side. And, but it's something, we have this biofeedback device with us. You don't need to hook yourself up to electrodes or to EEG. You can just sense it. And I would say this should be trained in
kindergarten.
In kindergarten,
yeah.
Like many other things, like a healthy diet. So
absolutely. Speaking of healthy diet, when we have sugar or processed food or something that is not whole healthy foods, what is that doing to the brain, to the gut-brain and the brain connection? The moment we intake something that is processed, sugary, alcohol, something that we know is not the healthiest consumption. What does that do to the gut? How does it affect the immune system and the brain?
Yeah, so there's a short-term, a quick effect, and there's something that takes longer. So the short-term effect, we have a lot of receptors in our mouths, like sweet taste receptors and bitter taste receptors, that also receptors that sense texture. So that's the immediate reaction. The brain gets this immediately, and it forms memories of this, and it forms. The gain of these receptors is determined again early on in life. Your sweet preference is programmed early on in life, and we do this extensively with our kids. That any positive event like birthdays or celebrations, lots of sugar.
Oh, right. And so they want it more and more.
Yeah, and then, for example, in Mexico with the former Mexican president Fox, who was also the CEO of Coke, man. So they promoted, sweet drinks like Coke, to mothers with young children to calm down their children. So one of the reasons for their big obesity problem is that their taste preferences have been programmed, Now this program is not permanent. You can change this as an adult if you go to a sugar-free diet. You will initially it's hard because you have to overcome that set point. But you'll notice that after a short period of time, a few months, your sensitivity to sugar changes. And you actually develop an aversity to sugary foods, which is a very interesting experience. Same thing can be said about spices, bitter taste. As kids, we hate bitter taste. As adults, we love some drinks that are really bitter. And these receptors, quite interesting, they're not just in our mouth, but they're also in our gut. Obviously, in our gut, they don't transmit conscious information. So if I infuse something sweet into your intestine, you wouldn't know if it's sweet or not.
Really, it's more through the tongue.
It's the tongue and the rest of your oral cavity.
So if I just put it into my gut, I wouldn't know it's sweet.
Then you would notice it, but it still generates signals back to the brain.
I'd feel probably more sick than anything. I'd probably feel like, because when you intake it, it tastes good, and then 10 minutes later, you're like, oh, my stomach hurts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is something that tastes good going in but hurts you?
Well,
after?
because different mechanisms kick in. Your mouth, so the first impression is all about the hedonic aspect of food. It's the thing that nature has designed us to, go after sweet berries so there wasn't that much sugar around, like a million years ago. Right. So whenever human ancestors found something sweet, they wanted to make sure they devoured it.
It was rare too.
It was rare.
It was scarce.
So it's
abundant. It's in everything.
It's in everything, and so what has happened now? It's no longer an adaptive mechanism to find these important things, but it's a maladaptive mechanism that causes all kinds of downstream problems. There's another thing about fat. It's the same thing. Fat has this hedonic quality, like butter. People love butter. People love chocolates with a lot of, fat in it, and not the
not
dark
the bitter,
chocolate.
The bitter kind, yeah.
So that's another one, and it's another one of these adaptive mechanisms where you want to have, when things were rare, you were craving for this, high caloric, this high caloric substance, sugar and fat. But when it gets downstream, other things happen. So it changes, so both the sugar and the fat changes the receptors that sense it in a way that, for example, fat that goes down into your intestine, they desensitize the vagus nerve. So normally the vagus nerve generates a feeling of satiety and fullness. So you don't want to stop eating. If you're on a high-fat diet, these receptors get desensitized, and you no longer get that feeling. So now you can keep on eating because the feedback mechanism that shuts off this is no longer, and the same with the sweet taste receptors. It does not. So our diet, with having, packed it with these high-caloric, high-density foods, has hijacked the system, and it's moved into an opposite direction. Also the microbes, so by eating these kinds of foods that are so overabundant in our diet now, you select a different population of microbes, and but it's particularly true about, so we crave the sugar, but not the complex carbohydrates, which are the good form of energy that we should be eating. So sugar is an easily digestible, immediately digestible and absorbable carbohydrate. The complex carbohydrates, which are mainly in plants, they cannot be absorbed quickly. They need the microbes. So if you're on a diet that's high in these absorbable sugar molecules and deficient in the non-absorbable carbohydrates, you select a population of microbes that does not produce the beneficial things in your gut. So you will ultimately, steps of events, create it's been called a leaky gut. So a gut that leads to the activation of the immune system in the gut that is not adaptive. So a lot of things that are happening today have become maladaptive. Evolution has designed us as this optimal machine that was perfect for hundreds of thousands of years, but we have changed the environment so dramatically that evolution never anticipated that. So now we have this big mismatch of the diet that feels good initially, but has a lot of downstream negative effects, making us more depressed, but also most importantly, engages the immune system in a way that then affects the brain. So some people with subset of patients with depression have an immune component and brain inflammation, but then also with these neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So, diet plays a big role at multiple levels, and what we have to realize that what we were designed for, these optimal survival machines, we have to fundamentally change that concept. We can no longer follow that and trust nature that will take care of this. So we have to really consciously change it, because we're not, otherwise we'll just continue to run into the health issues and that we're facing now.
What would you say are the 5 foods we should be eating that'll optimize our brain-gut connection? If we could choose these 5 foods consistently, what would you recommend?
Well, they would all fall into, the majority would fall into the category of plant-based foods. So it could be leafy vegetables, roots, seeds, nuts, and a big variety of these foods. So if you just eat tomatoes, or if you just eat kale, nothing else, it won't give you that benefit.
Really?
And the reason for that is, this is what I push, in my book. We should really refocus our diet on feeding the optimal food to our microbes.
To the microbes, the microbiome, or the microbe? Yeah.
Everything else will happen by default, because we are designed. Our ancestors lived on a diet, a very low caloric density. They were harvesting and gathering, herbs and nuts and seeds and tubers and things that were around them, all very low caloric density, very low sugar in it, lots of fiber.
Right.
Initially, humans weren't even able to process them. Then with cooking, we're able to break down some of the fibers. But if you think about it, the design of our bodies and our digestive system was really made with dealing with these types of foods that people encountered hundreds of thousands of years ago
in nature.
In nature, yeah. So we had a very large intestine, our fermenting system with all the microbes, and very little was absorbed in the small intestine, and a lot of it happened. The salvage of calories happened by the microbes, with the help of the microbes in the large intestine. We've completely reversed this. Now we have a diet that is 99% absorbed in the small intestine.
What does that mean?
That means we've taken out modern agriculture and modern...
You mean because with no fiber or something, and then it's processed in the small intestine, but fiber is more in the large intestine?
Yeah, it's taken out most of the fiber molecules, so we don't eat wild rice, but we eat the white rice. And we don't eat the types of potatoes, like the sweet potato, but we eat the potato. There's only
white
a few.
Potato.
The white potato, or the French fried potato is called.
Right.
That's the dominant form.
The sweet potato is the better one. Yeah.
And they've all been selected really based on these taste preferences, which have taken us on the wrong way. There's also a lot of molecules in plants, in addition to the fiber, that are non-absorbable. These polyphenols or antioxidants, they're not absorbable. They need the microbes to break them down, and then. So if you're on a diet that's deficient or very low in plant-based foods, you have a diet deficient in polyphenols and fiber, and so you prevent your microbes to get their normal service or normal servings of foods, and the microbes respond to that in a pattern that ultimately leads to shrinkage of the compromise of the gut barrier, activation of the immune system. And so my lesson is always, let's go back to a diet primarily that's optimized for the microbes.
The microbes, which is in the large intestine.
It is the large intestine, and that will be the remedy for, prevention of colon cancer, prevention
Really?
of cardiovascular disease, probably most likely also prevention of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
Diabetes.
Yeah, all of those.
So what are those? So those foods to help prevent all those things are a big variety of leafy veggies, roots, seeds, nuts. What other foods were you mentioning?
So it's also a few seafoods. There's mussels. There's the small fish like anchovies. Like all the small fish that are basically the bait for the big fish.
Really?
The small fish are still, there's several reasons for that. They're still abundant in the ocean. There's no decrease or no threat of extinction. They also are the lowest on the food chain, so they don't have this accumulation of heavy metals and toxins.
Interesting. They're going direct to the source, not being eaten by something else that's being eaten by something else.
And they're very popular in the Mediterranean cuisine.
Yeah.
So if you go to Spain or Italy, you'll see them in the market. Go to restaurants. Here, it's hard to find them other than in canned form.
Yeah, which is probably not the best form, is it? Or is it okay? I mean,
I can't answer that question, but it's the only one that's available here.
Right.
So, and there are companies that, source these to sustainable fisheries in Spain that I would probably trust more than the marketing campaign that you see here. Mussels also, very low on the food chain. Now these, and then wild salmon. So wild salmon is a controversial thing because on the one side, if everybody switched to wild salmon, there would
be none left.
There's nothing left. So there are again a few sources where there's sustainable harvest of salmon. They're typically more expensive than the farmed salmon, but the main health ingredients is omega-3 fatty acids that are in all these. They're in the small fish, they're in the mussels, and they're in wild salmon. They're not in the
bigger fish.
They're not in the bigger fish, and they're also not in the salmon that that are farmed because they get a totally different nutrition. They don't get the food that. So I mean, ultimately, these omega-3 fatty acids come from the algae, and the small fish feed on the algae, and then the salmon feeds on it.
Right.
So if you remove that, that source of omega-3 from the plants, then your fish will have a much lower concentration of these health-promoting molecules. And
what does omega-3 do for the gut-brain connection?
So omega-3 fatty acids have always been, for a long time, been found to be promoting for brain health in general. Both the growth and the function and the. There's now also studies that these omega-3 fatty acids have an influence on the microbes. And I can't tell you exactly. I mean, it's probably complicated because I hope this is not too complicated for you for your listeners. So when you ingest fats, they are processed in our small intestine. There's bile acids that make them absorbable. Then the kind of bile acids that are produced from depend on the type of fat that you eat. And there's probably a large variety of these bile acids. So the pattern of these bile acids that are produced, then stored in your liver, in your gallbladder, excreted into the small intestine, they are metabolized by your microbes. Depending on what microbes you have, they break them down into reabsorbable molecules that then get back into circulation. So what ends up back in the circulation, even though it starts out with facilitating fat absorption, once they get back into your circulation, they have a totally different function. They become signaling molecules to all your organs, including the brain. So now in Alzheimer's disease, for example, we know that short-chain fatty, that secondary bile acids play a role in the neurodegeneration. So if you eat the fats that contain omega-3 or omega-6 or other or saturated fatty acids, that has an effect on this system, which ultimately gets back into your blood and signals to your organs. So it's complicated, but I mean, everything, once you get into the brain-gut microbiome axis, it gets complicated. It's not linear. It's usually circular processes. And there's some unexpected players in this that we, in our typical nutrition education don't really pay attention, or in medicine,
What would you say the main, the key factors to destroying our gut? What would those be? Is it just all unhealthy food? Is it certain types of food? Is it other substances, drugs, or alcohol? What are the main things destroying it?
Yeah, so destroying
that causes leaky gut and inflammation.
Yes. So the factors that are worst for gut health, I would say, is that probably number one, diet. And there it's the standard American diet with the deficiencies in
the SAD diet, right?
The SAD, that's kind of a really appropriate acronym. That's deficient in all the components that are essential for a healthy microbiome, and ultimately then for a healthy gut barrier. And so then there's other things. There's toxins that come with the food and chemicals. So even if you're a vegetarian, and you don't pay attention to where your food comes from, you may be absorbing a lot of stuff that are herbicides or pesticides or insecticides that are used, for example, for the industrial style production of soybeans, for example. So beans are very healthy. It's a high fiber, high protein kind of food. So beans and lentils probably one of the healthiest foods. But if they're produced with Roundup and all these chemicals to destroy the things around
bugs,
them, in increasing amounts, you now start having the opposite effect. You're killing certain microbes, and many of these insecticides and herbicides, they do have an effect on the microbes. They do not have a direct effect on our gut cells. So that's been worked out in early studies. That's why they were FDA approved. But they do have an effect on the microbes. And that science has not been pursued in a great way. And what effect this ultimately has on, so for example, the Central Valley in California has an epidemic of Parkinson's disease.
Really? Central Valley in California?
Yeah, so the main producer of vegetables, so if you're a vegetarian, you would think, oh, this is the place where all my food comes from. But it is produced in an industrial agricultural style, with these, with the Roundup. It's not, so people are always worried about the genetically engineered food. I don't think we have evidence that by itself is actually harmful, even though we may not have the last answers on that. But the problem is that what's been thrown onto these
the chemicals
plants,
on top of the plants. So wait, the Central Valley in California is the highest density of Alzheimer's? Is that what you're saying?
Of Parkinson's.
Of Parkinson's, sorry.
It's an epidemic in that area. So a colleague of mine, UCLA, studies that population, and
because they're getting their food from that location.
Well, they're exposed. So first of all, the people are exposed. These dust croppers fly over these.
And so it's just exposed in the air as well.
It's exposed in the air. Probably, possibly the water as well. But then these foods, have on the surface residues of these increasing amounts of chemicals that are being sprayed on them, and the kind of washing that you do at home, just
like a rinse doesn't work.
It's not going to do
Really? It. Because is it baked inside the DNA of the vegetable or the fruit?
It's what the chemical reaction is and the physical reaction between these herbicides, and it's multiple. It's pesticides and herbicides, that are both sprayed on these plants.
Wow.
That probably play a big role. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, I think you need to be concerned about the source where your food comes from. Where
Wow. And Parkinson's is that the what's that disease? Is that the physical?
So Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease. The advanced classical
it's like the
symptoms,
shaking,
yeah,
like
the shaking,
the tightness,
the gait, the posture, the compromised walking.
Wow. So,
but that's the end result. This disease in the majority of people starts in the gut, in the nervous system of the gut. So the first degenerations happen at the gut level, and then they migrate. These degenerative bodies, these Lewy bodies, they migrate up the vagus nerve into the nucleus of the vagus nerve in the brainstem, and from there later, to higher centers, emotional regulation.
Wow.
Centers.
Are you able to reverse Parkinson's then through diet, or once you?
Well, this is the big hope. So the time from when the damage first shows up in your gut to the time it shows up in your brain can be up to 14 years.
Oh.
So there's a wide open window where you can do interventions, and that's for the time where dietary interventions would have the biggest effect. I don't think that once it has affected you and you develop depression and gait abnormalities that you can reverse this, with diet alone. There's obviously the medications that we have. In the future, there may be other ways of doing it, but for now, the biggest hope is that we can diagnose this early, they see it, the first symptoms. And so one of the first symptoms it's kind of interesting, is a new onset constipation, because when these nerves in the gut are affected, it doesn't function as properly anymore.
Wow.
99% of physicians and patients will not make that connection. This is the first sign of Parkinson's.
Constipation, like consistent constipation.
Yeah, first onset in somebody who never had that problem.
When you've never had it before, gotcha. You know what's interesting? I'm going to share a personal problem with you. When I was 16, I had 8 teeth removed. I had my wisdom teeth removed and then 4 other teeth. I was supposed to get braces. They were doing it to create gaps, spaces, so that I could get braces. I never got the braces until 20 years later. I decided to finally get Invisalign. They're not in right now. I take them out during interviews. And my jaw or my mouth or my teeth started to grow in a way where my back teeth never touched after that moment. So for 20 years, my back teeth never clenched down. It was just the front 2 teeth. And it would be very tiring to chew with just your front 2 teeth. So I would just swallow things after a few bites. And sometimes I would have it would be constipation, because it was just whole foods in my gut, and it was hard to break down. And in the last 2 years, I've been finally able to chew again fully, and it's crazy the ability to just flow, when I go to the bathroom, as opposed to feeling that. I'm curious if I did some long-term damage to my gut. It wasn't always like that, but I wonder if there is hope that I could reverse some of that, whatever damage I might have done internally.
Well, let me ask you, what kind of diet are you on? Are you in a...
Now I'm pretty healthy, yeah. I would say I'm 80% healthy conscious. On the weekends, have a pizza, have sugar, have some ice cream.
But you're an omnivore or carnivore?
I eat meat, yeah. I eat fish and chicken mostly.
So there's an interesting side to that. So our stomach is very capable of breaking down foods mechanically. So if you don't chew things properly, the stomach will handle a lot of this. And
compress.
And the stomach then has a mechanism, almost like a filter. You won't let any particle leave the stomach until it's 1 millimeter
really?
in diameter.
To go down through the intestine.
Yeah.
So it goes into the stomach first, and then through the small intestine to the large intestine, and then where?
Well, in the large intestine, it's being stored, and then ultimately you expel it with your bowel.
Expel it. Is that the whole gut? The stomach, the large and small intestine? Is that it? Comprised?
Starts with the esophagus,
The esophagus.
And you could almost say, since you mentioned it, that your oral cavity is part of it.
It's part of the gut.
It's the first step of it. I mean, there's multiple elements in your mouth and in your tongue, but you could almost say part of it is already, the entry zone to your gut. And
so is that included in the scientific research of like the gut, the mouth and the tongue and the?
Yeah. So so I was telling you about these taste receptors.
Yes.
That were first studied on the tongue and then later discovered also further downstream. It's certainly in terms of digestion, this relationship between the chewing and the so the more you chew, the faster it will leave your stomach. If you don't chew it, the stomach could take 2 hours, to break it down.
I'm assuming we want to chew it more. We don't want it to be stored in our stomach for 8 hours, right? We want it to process quickly. Is that correct?
That's probably. You could say it's. I mean, the human body is so adaptable. Our ancestors, they might have just gobbled.
Swallowed because they're starving.
Yeah,
if you just stayed there for 24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at some animals, the way they gobble things down. So I think we're adapted to different situations that we live in quite well. But what you describe doesn't make 100% sense to me that this is so related to your bowel movements.
Okay.
But certainly, because
it might have been diet too, because I just didn't have a good diet. I was just eating whatever I wanted because I was young and working out all the time.
I think that could be.
That might have been it. Okay.
Yeah.
And now I'm eating more consciously and
Yeah.
green juices and smoothies and healthier vegetables, all that stuff. So.
But I mean, the good thing is that you didn't. That you died, that your constipation didn't kick in now, because if you told me you always had normal bowel movements and the constipation just set in recently out of the blue, I would look, so what I do in my clinic, if somebody comes to me like that, I look at their hand movements, and this is characteristic pathognomonic movement, where people use their thumb and your index fingers to have this movement, which is characteristic for Parkinson's disease. And
if you see someone doing what's the movement?
It's this rolling movement between, like without having anything there.
Yes.
Between your thumb and your index,
first two fingers,
middle finger.
So if you see someone doing that kind of throughout the day or randomly, then that's
and that person comes to me and says, God, I can't believe that my bowel movements have changed so dramatically. I would, and I've done that. I've sent people like that to a neurologist for an early diagnosis.
Really?
And several times it was correct.
So you've seen this in person before?
I've seen this. Yeah.
You've seen people come in, usually typically men or some women as well.
I've seen this primarily on men.
So they'll come in, and how old are they? What's the age range?
I've seen it in their 50s.
And you'll notice them touching their fingers in this motion.
Yeah. So then have you always had this, and have you noticed this? The person said, no, I haven't noticed it. I haven't noticed it.
Really? So you're observing this as they're telling you about their bowels or about their constipation. Mm-hmm. Really?
So this has been really fascinating, and so this is why I think in terms of novel therapies, and what we can make a big impact on the disease that's really devastating, is if we have these early diagnoses, we have a window before before this migration to the brain has happened. I mean, there's another manifestation of Parkinson's disease that people have this what's called a Rem Sleep Abnormality, where during REM sleep you have these vivid dreams, and the only reason that you don't thrash around and hit your spouse next to you is because the brain is a mechanism to inhibit your motor system. So when you have these vivid dreams, your brain shuts off your
motor system.
Yeah, the motor system.
It feels like you're running and jumping, but you're just laid.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that some patients, the spouses. So I always ask the spouses also, have you noticed there's something different from what you have been used to, that that the person next to you hits around or falls out of bed or something like that. And so that's something that happens. So the REM sleep is regulated by a nucleus in your brainstem, very close to the vagus, the nucleus of the vagus. And that's an indication that some of this migration has happened to the brainstem. So, but if you have that abnormality, you almost have 100% certainty that you'll develop Parkinson's disease.
And is there a way to reverse this?
We don't know.
We don't know yet.
We don't know yet. So
maybe there's a way to delay it or to try to prevent.
Delay it. There could be medications to break up these degenerative bodies.
Wow.
You know. It's a lot of effort going into this now. So I think it's very exciting.
That's crazy that you can just notice this from people and see these signs. I am fascinated by all this, and I want to take it another direction for a second about, we talked about the gut-brain connection. There's a gut-brain, and then there's the brain, and then the gut and the brain connection, correct? Mm-hmm. But what about the gut-mind connection and the way we think? The mind, I guess, outside of the brain, you know, the mind or wherever you want to, you know, our thoughts outside of the brain. What is that connection like, the gut and the mind? Yeah, so
this was something when I published my first book, people got fascinated by the idea, does the gut have a mind? You know, does the
gut have a mind?
Does the enteric nervous system have a mind? Because it's similar to the brain.
Because the mind-gut connection was your first book.
Yeah. And I would say, I don't think we have any evidence for that. But as a scientist, I never ruled something out. You know, I would say, based on our current knowledge, there are concepts about the mind. Dr. Dan Siegel, for example, who's sort of a prominent, expert on the mind. He also doesn't believe that the mind is a property of our big brain.
What is the property of?
It's a system. It's a system how a brain interacts with the environment, with the people around us, and there's this loop, that goes so that the mind is not an isolated self, but so the self. I mean, this gets into this Buddhist discussion.
Yes.
Self is kind of an illusion. The mind is something bigger that connects us with the people around us, with their minds. And I would say I kind of like this idea, but I would include the feedback loop back to the gut. So it's a brain, gut, mind, and people around you. That's the system of the mind. But
so what's the best definition of the mind for you that you've studied from either science or Buddhism? And
that's a difficult one.
What is the mind?
I tend to think that every complex system ultimately develops a mind. That's kind of
the gut develops a mind, the brain develops a mind, the body develops a mind.
And it's not all the same, but they have their minds. There's multiple minds. And there's a hierarchy of these minds based on the complexity of these systems. We've often asked that question, does the microbiome, so this is not just the gut microbiome, but the microbiome on the planet, because there's microbes everywhere. It's the most abundant life form. And we are connected in some ways. Our microbes in the gut are connected to the microbes in the soil, microbes in the air, in the water. Does that system have a mind? Because it's so complex.
Yes.
It's widely distributed. So
the universe has a mind, right?
The universe has a mind. I have to say, it's not very scientific.
That's why I love this.
but I had a migration in my, so I was very open to these ideas before I finished medical school. Then in medical school, obviously, you have to be trained in not pursuing these ideas. You never get a grant. You have to be trained in
science.
You do science. It's focused. It's hypothesis-driven. It's linear. But then I think it comes with age, and coming back to my roots and my mind at the time, which was always this holistic. So coming back to this concept of interconnectedness, which I think is kind of the string theory of life, really. It's not, there's no life without interconnectedness. And the systems, so we can, even in science, we use mathematical tools and supercomputers to look at the interaction between genes, between molecules between signaling molecules between microbes, between immune cells. We look at them now as systems, and we apply these mathematical tools. There's something called graph theory, where you can quantitate, and describe a system based on its nodes. So on the cover of my new book, you can see this. There's nodes and there's connections. So the connections are the edges. It's called the edges. If a node has, the more connections one node has, the more it becomes a hub in the system. So I think ultimately systems like that, I think ultimately develop minds. Be it a technical system. Ultimately, I think, and this is sort of against what Dan Siegel says. Without a body, you couldn't have a mind. I'm not sure if that question has been answered yet. We'll see that. We've fast forward 20 years, the supercomputers we'll have then. Will they develop some module that is like a body? That is that necessary? But I think that this property of complex systems, developing minds, and these are not conscious minds. I think probably the human mind is the one that has self-consciousness, that it knows about itself, and it's self-aware. All these other minds, they operate, but unless you believe in some, Hinduistic concepts that there is these higher levels of consciousness. Yeah, I don't want to go there really at this point.
Sure.
People that take psychedelics tell me that you have these experiences of contacting these entities. But this is beyond what I really mean with interconnectedness and minds.
So this is something that you were curious about as a teenager in your early 20s. Then when you went to medical school, you essentially had to say, I need to shut this out of my mind and focus just on the science, just on the research, just on like the practical, I guess, or like the findings through science. But do I hear you're kind of like opening back up to more of this, like figuring out the mind, brain, gut connection? And
I'm opening back up to this, and there's different dimensions. So there's that other healing traditions. Hippocratic medicine, for example, was a medicine of interconnectedness. So with the universe, with the weather, the climate, soil. Same about traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. They were all systems of that had interconnectedness at their core belief. And I think we come back to that now. I don't know how these traditions came up with these ideas, just by observation, but they certainly have survived thousands of years. And I think they're more accurate. This just sounds funny coming from a scientist who spent his whole life doing that. I think they're closer aligned, these interconnected models, with reality of the planet than some of our Western ideas of simple, linear, mechanistic, machine concept-based ideas of reality.
Right.
There has been this. I also believe the mismatch that we're seeing today between the way the planet is really organized as one of the most complex networks with these minds, and the way we have been interacting with it in the West, from the starting with the scientific revolution. You could almost bring religion in it, the monotheistic religions, which put humans at the center of the universe, which has been proven wrong over and over again, but there's still this persistent idea, this mismatch between what's in our minds, the way we see reality, the way we teach our children, the self being the most important part, rather than seeing the large picture. And I think that mismatch with reality is at the cause of many of our problems, be it climate change, be it medical problems. So
You mentioned religion for a second, so I want to talk about that. How does religion play into the gut immune connection? Does religion support our immune system or weaken it, in your opinion? And are you into any religion currently, practicing religion, or is that not a scientist's role?
Well, so I've always been attracted to Buddhism, which is not a regular religion. You know, it's
a philosophy,
it's a
spiritual philosophy, yeah.
And that to me is the one that matches the best. You know, both my scientific beliefs and also the way I look at reality. And with religions, your questions are really fascinating, I have to say.
You came to the school of greatness, not the school of average.
So religion, being connected, believing in some higher force, or believing in the harmony of the universe, there's many studies that have shown that is health promoting.
Health promoting, having a greater sense of, or believing in something greater than yourself.
Of connectedness.
Of connectedness, being we're all connected, community, yeah, okay.
And I think it goes back to the original meaning of this term, religio, I think from Latin, being connected. You know,
that's right.
So this is clearly something, I think that's essential. Now, if there's some strange religious sects in this world now, you know, that I don't want to, you know, name any of these that were hatred. And I mean, we just look at what happens with some segment of Islam. What happened during Catholic beliefs in the Middle Ages? You know,
right.
Killing, burning millions of women. I mean, so it has two sides to it.
The hatred side of religion is not supportive.
Yeah, and I don't know how these things could come up. So, to my opinion, these people were really not religious. You know, they had this illusion of if they go to church every day or do some ritual that they're religious. I think a truly religious person, there's certain concepts to that, being connected to your community, being connected to nature, being connected to some higher entity. I think those are all health promoting ideas, and I think that has. There are studies, I think, even tracing this back again to immune cells, to the health of immune cells and the gene expression patterns. You wouldn't think that something as high level as religion would go all the way down to these immune cells in your, you know, in your liver and in your spleen, or in your gut. 70% of immune cells live in
the gut. Really?
So, but that's. Yeah, I think you have to be careful what people do for religion. Anytime there comes hatred and intolerance into religion, I don't think it's a true religion.
Right.
It shouldn't call itself a religion.
Sure. It's an agenda, right?
Yeah.
It's like an agenda. So 70% of your immune cells are in the gut throughout your entire body, right? 70%, is that what you're saying? Yeah. You said the main factor is diet. For optimizing or hurting your immune system is the main factor.
Well, let's say that it's one of the two main factors.
Okay.
The other one being the brain and the signals the brain sends down.
Is that the thoughts the brain sends down, or
mainly the emotions? I think we know it about the emotions and we know it about stress. I think we know less about the influence of thoughts on that system.
Interesting.
But certainly belief systems, I would say it's not been studied in as great detail as emotions and stress have. So typically...
What's the difference between an emotion and a belief system?
So an emotion is a programmed response in your brain that triggers a... So it's both an emotional feeling, so you feel the emotion, then it's an emotional response, and there's several of those, almost like computer programs stored in our brain, because humans have experienced these situations so many times that instead of reconstructing these emotions every time from scratch, It's stored it's stored in a program.
So when we see or experience something, it's re-triggered because it's been there for so long and we feel it again.
It's like an app, it's like an app that says turn on. And
so an emotion is a program response in the brain or an emotional feeling in the brain.
Yeah, and so you have the emotional feeling in one part of the brain. It's the part called the insular cortex. And then you have the emotional response, which is another part of the brain, the cingulate cortex and the amygdala, that then generates the output, to the body. To the body,
and mostly to the gut is what I'm saying. Or is it all throughout the body?
It's throughout the body, but it has the biggest impact on the gut because in the gut is the immune system and it's this hormonal system, and it's so it has so these emotional signals go to the heart, and the heart beats faster. The heart is a very simple organ. It's a mechanical pump. And if you are anxious, it increases the heart rate. If you're depressed, it might slow it.
And then that impacts the body.
It doesn't impact the whole body in the same way as
it does or does not?
It does not.
It does not.
And then
when the heart rate goes up or down, does that impact the body?
Well, you feel that. So it's being fed back to the brain, and it creates, again, this circular response, this emotion. But what happens with the gut is why it is so unique. Signal goes down from this emotional reaction.
Stored in the brain, signal goes down.
Yeah. Yes, goes down to the gut, and then it affects the immune cells. So then the immune cells carry that signal throughout the body all the way back to the brain. Also affects the microbes. The microbes produce molecules, what we call neuroactive molecules. For example, they play a big role in the serotonin production. And then these molecules, some of them get into the bloodstream, some act on the vagus nerve, and again, it feeds back to the brain. So it's again this loop, that, and the gut generates probably with its microbiome most of these feedback signals that go back to the brain. Other systems like your muscular system feeds back to the brain as well. So the sense of well-being after working out. Clearly, molecules that are generated by metabolism in your muscles, have some effect on the brain as well, on your well-being. But quantitatively, and the diversity of signals that are generated from the gut are much, much higher.
So the top two things are food, your diet, and your emotions.
I would
that
say
affect your immune system.
Affects the gut and the immune system. Yeah.
Wow. And so what I'm hearing you say is that if someone doesn't learn how to regulate their emotions or process emotions in a healthy manner, it could weaken their immune system in a massive way. Is that correct?
It
has
makes,
the potential.
There's always this important concept of resilience and resistance. So anytime you compromise the complexity of a network or an ecosystem, it becomes less resilient under stress, for example, or under when you get sick, or So a good example is the pandemic that we have gone through. There was a group of the population, both in this country but also worldwide, that probably has a compromised gut ecosystem, and including the microbes and the immune system. And they responded to that viral infection in a different way, either with being more likely to get infected, more likely to end up in the hospital, in the ICU, dying, develop long COVID. There seems to be this at high risk population. And if you look at them, they also have what's called comorbidities. They have other diseases, these chronic diseases like diabetes and metabolic syndrome and obesity and heart disease. And that's not a coincidence, because all these diseases are also related to our poor diet. So there's this common denominator, that the ecosystem that is made up by the immune system in the gut and the nervous system in the gut and the hormonal system, that ecosystem is probably, if that is weakened, it's less resistant and less resilient to any perturbation. And we'll see this in the future, unfortunately, because I'm not sure if as a society we're making a huge effort now to deal with these discrepancies of health in our country. You know,
I feel like it's more, we're not focused on the nutritional side. Healing through nutrition, right? It's more like how do we just put medicine or substances over top to kind of...
Yeah, so all the talk is about access to the healthcare system. That's the main, and that's a problem as well. You know, definitely. But I think.
What about prevention? What about like optimization, prevention for your own body and your own body?
And that may not have to come from the healthcare system. That could come from other organizations.
Absolutely.
Come from teachers. You know,
yeah.
Early. I mean, all these things start obviously in childhood and the way children are raised and. Programmed, the immune system is programmed, and you know, the brain is programmed early on in life. So you don't need a medical system to do that, to help with this programming. You know, you need other, I think, educational programs that do that. You know, and I feel if you, as society, if you want to prevent this in the future, I mean, it's obviously a colossal task. You know, we have to move like it's like moving an aircraft carrier around, you know, 360 degrees.
It's also changing belief systems, lifestyle and habits for decades for people that have eaten a certain way or thought about a certain thing.
You could almost give up on the the size of that task, but then on the other hand, and I kind of regret that I didn't address this more in my book. This whole you know, socioeconomic inequality in the country that plays a big role in the vulnerability, because it does affect all these systems that we've been talking about. You know, they're not detached from. I mean, just think about the anger that we've seen with some of the, some of the movements and demonstrations. I mean. That anger is not just in the face or, you know, thrashing things. It's also at the gut level. It's
in the gut level.
It's at the gut level.
So the anger, when we feel anger, resentment, or any of these anger emotions, let's say, less than joyful emotions, let's say, when we feel that, is this stored in the brain, a memory in the brain that is stored, or is it more stored in the gut?
I would say it's stored as a program routine that calls on multiple networks within the brain to generate a response. You can see it in our brain, on our face. The facial expression of anger is one of these motor routines that go to the facial muscles and to, you know, your eyes and the pupils. But the same thing goes down to every organ and affects, you know, the gut in a particular way.
Really?
And so just to reemphasize this, so the emotional feeling, typically the emotional feeling does not stay by itself. It's not an isolated feeling. It always has a motor response to it. There's a word in science, the emotional motor system, which has, you know, all these apps for these different emotions. If you activate this, you get the motor system of anger, or the motor system of anxiety, or jealousy. And when we talk about emotions, often also in psychotherapy, we just talk about the emotional feeling, you know, and you can deal with the emotional feeling over and over again. If you don't deal with the reaction, the physical reaction to it, you leave out, you know, a big part of it. I mean, there's a lot of therapists today, you know, that have so an integrated view of mind and body.
Right.
So
you're saying if you just deal with the analytical thought about the emotion, you may not be able to transform it into something of a healing process without integrating the body connection to the feeling. Is that right?
And that's where the reason, you know, so in my practice, even though I have experience and you know, I've benefited a lot from this period of going through Jungian analytical therapy, we don't use it. We don't recommend this to our patients with these physical disorders. We recommend cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive to deal with the brain part, and behavioral with how you change your response to that.
Your reactions to
it.
Interesting. This is fascinating. In your 40 years of doing the research and studying, what has been the biggest breakthrough for you personally as a human being, where you discovered something and said, wow, I've been doing this all wrong, or I had no idea about this thing and now I need to implement this thing to improve my life? What has been that for you?
Probably the most exciting moment was when we did a study not that long ago, which triggered then writing the first book, about that, if you, so we studied healthy young women, and they went on a 4-week course of taking a probiotic cocktail, and we looked at their emotional symptoms. So they didn't have any physical symptoms. And we looked at their brain function with brain imaging, and we found that there were changes in the response of some of the networks in the brain.
4 weeks of probiotics.
Yeah. And so that has obviously been taken as an indication. So I can tell you if this actually had a positive psychological effect, because there was no. So these were healthy women. They were not anxious.
They were already healthy.
They were healthy. They had no symptoms.
Healthy.
Yeah, and so in retrospect, you could say we made a mistake. We should have studied anxious, individuals.
Depressed, stressed, anxious.
So
what happened with the result of these 4 weeks for these women?
So there were changes in the systems of the brain, the emotional recognition or emotional attention systems within the brain that were attenuated. So the emotional reaction was attenuated. You could speculate, yes, this is an important first step in not being as emotionally reactive or stress reactive. But that study, those are expensive studies. So, and it's not that easy. If I go with a protocol like this to the NIH for funding, they would much rather have you do this in mice. To have a mechanistic study where you can say it's really this cell in the brain that responds, and so in these human studies, much more heterogeneous. You have to do very large numbers of. So we never followed this up as an anxiolytic, potential therapy, even though this concept of psychobiotics has been promoted by colleagues of mine in Ireland. John Cryan has written a book about it as well.
Psychobiotics?
Psychobiotics. So
what
basically microorganisms that have a beneficial effect on psychological issues.
What are these psychobiotics?
These are particular strains of microbes that they've found in mice. See, the thing is, in mice you can show almost everything, because you can control every aspect of the mouse, from the temperature, the food, how many mice are in a cage, and, which you can never do in a human. So you can see things and demonstrate things in these mouse models that are mind-boggling, in terms of depression-like behavior that can be changed with microbes, anxiety-like behavior, social behavior, social isolation. So all the things that we think are models of preclinical models of human disease. But then it's been very hard to prove these same things in humans. And so one of our efforts is, and I used to do animal experiments and cell experiments for a long time in my career. But then I sort of developed this ambition. I just want to do this now in humans. I want to see, does this really relevant for
this
humans?
Work?
And I would say ultimately, maybe none of the existing probiotics that are being marketed have dramatic effects on your mind. I wouldn't, if a patient comes to me with an anxiety disorder, I wouldn't say take this probiotic because it's been shown in the mouse, to decrease anxiety. if somebody comes to me with anxiety and they say, I've been taking this probiotic cocktail, then I would say, if you think you benefited, keep taking it, but let's add relaxation techniques or stress management or CBT, or in the worst case, medication. So that's where we are today. We're not. This may change in the future. We may have microbial strains, either natural strains or genetically engineered strains that produce a particular neurotransmitter that is like a Valium type of thing, or increase serotonin production, and they may have this effect. So I think psychobiotics are a possibility for the future. We just don't have clinically relevant examples.
Is there clinical research about the supplement world, just supplements in general, taking supplements to improve the gut microbiome or immune system, or to get the nutrients and the vitamins and the minerals that maybe we're not consuming in our foods? Has there been research on this that you have found or done?
I haven't done the research, and it's a difficult question to answer because, for example, the vitamins, Linus Pauling was promoting vitamin C for everything, and that this could, even though they did large studies and even though he was a Nobel Prize winner, it could never really be proven that there's much more than a placebo effect. And I take vitamin C, and even knowing for me that it's probably placebo, and it works.
And it works.
It works. So I don't really care if the vitamin does
whatever. If it works in your mind, then it works in your body, right?
So I would say this applies to a lot of the supplements.
Do you take other supplements besides vitamin C or vitamin D, maybe?
No, I don't.
Just vitamin C.
Yeah.
No multivitamin, no probiotic,
and I do the vitamin C. The first sign or symptom I have of a cold coming on.
You take it.
If I miss that moment, it doesn't work for me.
Really?
So, which also points towards placebo. You release molecules in your body that.
Gosh. So, how does the placebo affect the immune system? Because I grew up in a religion called Christian Science that was all about the power of the thought and the mind of healing the body. And, never took medicine, never had shots as a kid, never had any of these things. We were just taught in the spiritual practice of healing through the mind, through the thought, through the belief that you are whole already.
I mean, what do you think about that religion today, based on what we've been talking about? And
I feel like the religion in general, it's funny, I haven't gone to church in a long time. I've kind of just been, for whatever reasons, nothing against the religion, but I feel like it's more relevant, the findings, the practices, the science of the mind from what I was raised. And this was discovered in the 1800s by a woman. It's like the more people I interview, like yourself, like other doctors, scientists, they're speaking about these concepts, quantum physics and, drawing a word on a water and the molecules shifting. It's like they're speaking these ideas, healing yourself with your mind through breath work, through other practices than medical practices. And I'm like, well, yeah, this is what I was raised to learn, these types of concepts. So I feel like it's more relevant than ever. I don't think they've done a good job as a religion to make it as widespread as they could because of the format of the church, process. But the ideas are more relevant than ever in my mind.
Absolutely, and I'm also a big believer in the placebo response, and people have underestimated. I mean, they're beautiful studies, scientific studies. We know what we've done studies, what parts of the brain are being activated when you believe.
It's not even real. It's a belief. You're shifting the idea of the belief. The actual substance does nothing.
There's nothing, and the most interesting thing, a friend of mine at the Beth Israel Hospital, Tony Lembo, they did a study. Where they had three groups. They had a placebo group where it was hidden from the subject that was it a drug or was it a placebo. They had a drug group, and they had an unconcealed placebo. So they actually told them this is a placebo pill.
Really?
And
so they had a pill that they didn't know was a placebo, but it was.
Yeah.
Whatever, a sugar pill or whatever, right? They had the drug.
Yeah.
And they had another pill.
It was an
unconcealed. They said,
unconcealed.
this is a placebo pill.
This is a placebo pill.
Which one worked the best?
the unconcealed placebo worked as well as the drug, which is amazing.
That's crazy. They said this is a placebo. There's no drug.
Yeah.
It's a placebo.
Yeah. So.
But if you believe it will work, it will work. Is that kind of what they said, or?
I don't know what the details, the instructions were, and I mean I had a similar personal experience.
That's crazy.
You know, when I was a kid, so I had these warts on my fingers, and you know. It got pretty bad, and then the first time went to a surgeon. The surgeon resected them. I still have my scars on the middle finger. But then they came back, and then somebody said, "Well, there are these people. You know, there's this old farmer I know in a village who does this. You know, praying over your warts, and they'll go away."
This is crazy. You're telling me this because I had a similar situation. So tell me this. Yeah.
I said, "No way."
Tell me this.
I absolutely did not believe it. You know, but then we went anyway. So this is where the difference is. I went anyway. So
right, you're like, I still want to figure out if there's a way.
I would have figured this out. So there was some hidden belief that this could work, and within 2 days, these warts were gone.
No way.
So it's just, and I think there's many examples.
I have a similar story about that. I have a similar story. I had these in college. I was playing football in college, and for whatever reason, the bottom of my foot started to get covered in, like, I think they're called planter's warts or something, like little black dots. It was so painful to walk. And I wore cleats, football cleats. And so every time I'd press down and push off, like the cleat would kind of push up. And it was so painful. The trainers, the athletic trainers, tried to scalpel them out. It was like so many of them. And the bigger ones, they tried to scalp them out, wouldn't go away. They keep coming back. And it was like multiplying. And now I'm getting worried. I'm like, the bottom 1 foot is covered in these like planter's warts, these little like black dots that were so painful. And I remember going to my sister, Heidi. She lived a few hours away, and I went there, I think, during like Thanksgiving break or something. And she put me through a healing process, a visualization technique. And she laid me down, and she put on some like soft music, and she said, "We're gonna practice something, we're gonna heal you right now." And I was like, no way, but I wanna figure out if this will work. And literally, she put me down and she kind of guided me through a visualization and meditation process. She's like, I want you to imagine you're in a river. You're laying in a river, and the water is flushing through the top of your head, through your body, and flushing everything out of your body. And it's loosening up the warts on your feet, and it's just, they're falling away. Literally, I practiced this every day for the next week, and they were gone a week later.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I was like, this is nuts. They couldn't get them out with a scalpel, but I was able to somehow release them through a visualization and a belief practice. And I think about it, it just sounds crazy.
No, it sounds crazy.
You did it too. 2 days later, it was gone.
Yeah, it was, and no scar, nothing.
And this was like a big wart in your...
Yeah.
So what is that?
Well, so the only way that I can explain this is that deep inside of us, this is obviously placebo has sort of a negative bite taste because it's the enemy of the pharmaceutical industry, it's the enemy of medicine.
Science.
We always want to prove it's better than placebo, even though placebo is incredibly powerful. There's so many studies that show that the medication adds, even antidepressants, at 10% above the placebo response. When you think about this, that without taking medication, you almost have the same therapeutic response as with taking this chemical that's engineered based on, decades of science. And so the only way that I can explain it is it's a self-healing system that's built into our bodies. It's a property of the complex ecosystem that our body is, and it's ancient. It probably was there from the very beginning, of evolution. Has improved, has saved, the species from extinction many times. With diseases and injuries. That resilient people. Resilience. It's a state where you can bring this self-healing system better to the surface than if you're non-resilient. So you can almost trace it back. Now we talked about a complex microbiome ecosystem is more resilient to infections. So it has its own self-healing or self-correcting properties. And I think it's so deeply ingrained that even if you tell somebody and this person consciously hears that, the system inside of you overcomes that conscious response. It doesn't care. If you go through this ritual that somebody gives you these pills,
Yes.
and somehow deep inside your mind, it triggers this system. I think the best thing would be to get rid of that term placebo and just really change it
To what? Belief? Or just
self-healing.
self-healing?
Self-healing. And interestingly, it can go in the opposite direction too. And talking about again about this, gut health, and so there's many. It's an epidemic now. This what some people have called the national eating disorder epidemic. That so many people think, oh, I can't eat this and I can't eat this, and gluten makes me deadly sick,
Right.
and
Too much almond butter, and now this and that.
yeah,
It's
and a
like,
multi-billion-dollar industry, and you see these ridiculous things. You get a water bottle and it says gluten-free,
right, soy-free, gluten-free, just
so-
water.
So it's there's this sibling of the placebo response, which is the nocebo response. So if you believe
Nocebo?
nocebo,
What does that mean?
it means it's a substance that you believe hurts you or has a negative effect on your health, and I think it goes back to the Latin word that it says something about damage, nocere. But anyway, I personally believe that talking about the supplements and these recommendations and these
Yes.
experiences, I would say 80%, maybe 75% is either placebo with all the supplements, or is nocebo with all the recommendations what you can't eat and what you
Right.
should avoid.
Wow.
And once this is ingrained in your mind, it's very powerful. I once sat next to a couple on a plane back from Barcelona from a meeting, and they had bought this delicious sandwich. I was sitting next to me, and I was observing this young couple, and they were opening up the plastic foil. And this delicious sandwich was there, and then they took this sandwich apart, and
Took all the things off of it?
took
or-
all the things off, and then I dared to ask him. I said, "Why are you doing this? Do you have any?" "Oh, we're allergic to this and we're allergic to this." I said, "My God, it must be very difficult to enjoy a vacation in Spain or in
Right,
Italy
right.
if you're always afraid. It's always triggering this anxiety response."
Wow.
And then if they eat it, so what we talked about earlier, the anxiety and the worry doesn't stay in your mind; it goes in your gut. So once this food gets into your gut, you don't feel well because I've done something bad.
Oh, man. It's almost like you could do the reverse, where it's like, you know what? There's this delicious pizza and ice cream and chocolate that is right in front of me. And you could almost trick your brain to say, this is not going to affect me in a negative way. Like, this is going to feel good. I'm going to feel good afterwards. It's going to taste great. I'm going to feel joyful and happy by having this experience. Or is that impossible with the chemical compounds that are entering your body? Is it impossible to trick it in the other way? Like, I'm
I
drinking
think-
this alcohol and I'm going to be healthy tomorrow,
Well, the problem is with some of these unhealthy foods, you actually feel temporarily good.
Momentarily,
So the
yeah.
comfort food or the alcohol, the drink in the evening, you get this temporary well-being, sense of well-being. Comfort food is a very good example. The high-fat, high-sugar food gives you this, and there's been studies on that. Temporarily makes you less anxious, less depressed. But then in the long term, it's the opposite.
Right.
It's
So is there no way to train your mind to not have anxiety around what you're eating? Even though you know the nocebo, it's like, this is not good for me, but you know what? I'm going to enjoy my life. It's, I'm going to do it in moderation, and I'm just going to be joyful in the process so that when it hits my gut, I'm happy. As opposed to,
No, I think-
I know this is not good for me, but I'm going to do it anyways.
I think this is something you should do anyway. I mean, you should have the healthier diet, but you should always have this enjoyment, and many studies have shown, for example, with the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean, people living in these countries always had a very close and active social life, festivities, and I've experienced this. We have experienced this a couple of times, visiting with Italian families, and it feels incredibly good, to have a long table and and even though knowing that some of the stuff that we ate was not that healthy, it was a good experience.
The enjoyment was still powerful, which probably didn't affect your gut as much, or.
And people have shown that is part of the secret to the health benefit of these diets. That's this enjoyment, this social
connection, the connectedness.
This connectedness and the happiness and
wow.
Yes, we also have a friend, who's he's older than we are, but we've always enjoyed going out for dinner with him because his enjoyment is infectious. Picking the restaurant and picking the table in the restaurant that he knew beforehand and bring a bottle of wine from his wine collection. Everything was passion,
Yes.
And he's in his 80s. He had a very serious chronic disease. A miracle that he made into his 80s. I don't think he has paid a lot of attention to a healthy diet. I think that passion...
But he's got joy.
That joy and that passion is a big part of it. And I would say speculation,
Right.
Again, it's the brain-gut axis and the immune system that is affected by this passion.
How much we talked about nutrition, but how much does stress, I guess we talked about emotions, but how much does the emotion of stress affect the immune system? If you're eating the right nutritional foods, but you are constantly in stress, consciously or unconsciously, how much does that suppress the immune system?
Yeah, that's a good question because, as I said earlier, the stress has an effect both on the microbes and on this barrier, the gut barrier, the leakiness. Mm-hmm. And so then you have two forces that go in opposite directions. I can't answer that question, my guess is the easy answer would be if you have both the stress and the unhealthy diet. That's a no-brainer, and that happened.
It seems like a lot of people have that.
A lot of people have this
diet, and they're stressed out all the time.
I would say that is the cause, the root cause of this, non-infectious chronic disease epidemic that we have. The combination of those two factors.
Like what are those diseases?
Cardiovascular disease.
Obesity leads to...
Yeah, so obesity, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, brain diseases, degenerative brain diseases.
Alzheimer's,
colon cancer particularly.
Stress and diet are the two main factors that cause those things.
And now we know, there's obviously, like when I say this all boils down to the gut barrier, it's obviously a very simplistic explanation. There's scientists working on every little step of these mechanisms, but the sort of luxury that I have at this stage of my career is I can look at the big picture.
Yeah.
And I think without this detailed science of each of these little details, we wouldn't be where we are today. But I think we also need this big picture view, and for the interventions and the recommendations to patients and prophylactically to families, because nobody's interested what molecule really is contributes like 1% of the variance to this disease. Scientists are, and industry is, because industry wants to patent this molecule to make a medication.
Right.
But so my main interest is really spread the big picture,
Yes.
And I feel pretty confident except for some of your questions, really intriguing questions about religion, which I cannot guarantee in any way scientifically, but most of the things that we talked about today, I think are supported by science.
Mm-hmm. Most of them, yeah.
Most of them.
What would you say, a personal question, if you could recommend 5 things that everyone should do on a daily basis that would optimize their immune system, their brain-gut connection, and their overall well-being. Maybe these are things that you're doing or things you know you should be doing more of. It could be as simple as waking up with gratitude or falling asleep with gratitude. It could be making sure you call a loved one. It could be eating a healthy diet, meditating, breathing. What would you say are the 5 things you would recommend to optimize the immune system?
Yeah, so you mentioned this, the mindfulness practices, waking up in the morning with gratitude and focusing your mind, clearing it from all the chatter. Definitely something that you want to do upon waking up, and I'm not doing this enough. We're not, so my wife and I are not doing this enough. We wake up like probably millions of people and look at our iPhone. That's what you should not be doing.
Right, okay.
The second one is daily, regular, moderate exercise. Unless you're a competitive athlete, obviously you want to push that to the maximum. But for the average person, and this again supported by science, that moderate, regular exercise can give you an extra, in combination with these other lifestyle factors, an extra 10 disease-free years.
Really?
So if you're 50 and you take a questionnaire of what you're doing and compare this to people that do these positive lifestyle things, the ones that do it, they add another 10 years of healthy.
That's crazy.
Which is amazing. There's no medication that can do this.
No, free.
Free.
Just move your body.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next thing is, so we have the mindfulness, the exercise. The diet, clearly major factor, a largely plant-based diet, which doesn't have to be vegetarian or vegan unless for ethical reasons, which then I think it's really justified. Social interactions. So in terms of the diet, alcohol, that's always a question mark. There's some studies and some people say even the smallest amount of alcohol is bad for you. I would go more with the with the Mediterranean diet, that a small amount of like the glass or half glass of red wine in the evening is a lot better than taking a sleeping pill or a Valium. And it has, health-promoting polyphenol molecules in it, and then having this sense of connectedness in some shape or form, and the connectedness would be to your friends, to some higher meaning in life, and that relates to compassion, empathy. And like when I say these things, they sound very,
non-scientific.
But a good friend of mine and colleague, superb researcher at UCLA, Steve Cole, who has done, quoted him a couple of times, has done these studies looking at immune cells and the gene expression in these immune cells. He has shown that some of these, like empathy or eudaimonia, that it's like believing in a higher sense, and not thinking that personal happiness makes you happy, but it's the reward you're getting from living a life based on a higher meaning and giving joy to other people. He has shown that positively affects your immune cells, which is an amazing thing. So these recommendations that I gave you, these 5, are not just my personal preferences that I came up with. They're based on science, which is amazing.
That's beautiful. I feel like I could go on for a couple more hours with you, but I want to wrap it up for the final few questions. Before I go into the final few questions, I want people to get the book, The Gut-Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health. This is going to help a lot of people. Make sure you guys get a few copies of this book, give it to some friends. And if you want Dr. Mayer to come back on and share more about these things, then let me know in the comments below if you'd like to have him come back on and share more stuff. So this is great. It's got a lot of research in here. A lot of information, a lot of how-to. So make sure you guys get a copy of this.
40 references at the
40
last
references.
chapter.
Wow, there you go. 40 references. The gut-immune connection. This is a question I ask everyone towards the end. It's called the 3 truths question. And I feel like as a scientist and as a researcher, you also have a very spiritual part of you that you're always discovering and learning new things. I was reading your bio about you've studied the Native American philosophies. I think it's the Amazon as well. You kind of like studied these tribal, ancient wisdom, and you've coupled it with modern science, and you've tried to find a sense of meaning that works for you in your life, which has been really beautiful. This is called the 3 truths. So I'd like you to imagine a hypothetical scenario. It's your very last day on this earth, many years away, and you've accomplished everything you want to accomplish. You're happy, but you gotta go to the next place. This life is over. And for whatever reason, you've got to take all of your body of work with you. So all of your research, your material, your content, no one has access to it anymore. But you get to leave behind 3 things you know to be true from all your life lessons, the lessons you would leave behind. What would be those 3 truths for you that you would share?
Wow, that's a tough one. Yeah, I would say, even though this is not really necessarily publicly available, so I've been very diligent for a long time in my life to write a very detailed, diary where I went through why I made this decision and what happened and what were my dreams. And that's definitely something, probably nobody will ever get to read this, But I think it's something. It would be a good lesson to, because when I go back and look at these documents today, I see that there was something that I had in my mind as a goal, which goes to the things that I've arrived on today. The details don't really matter. It's that you have these goals deeply ingrained in your mind early on, and you pursue them and not let detours get in the way to change the direction. It's kind of this concept of individuation, recognizing who you are, and even though you may put things aside temporarily for various reasons, financially, or never deviate from that path. I think that's
always come back to
always come back to it.
Okay, that's number 1. Is that right?
Yeah.
Number 2, truth.
For my scientific writings, I would say it's sort of strange today, because for a long time when I pursued that science of brain-gut connection, nobody was interested in it. Now the whole world writes about it and writes cookbooks about it.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if anybody would pay attention, that we did this at a time when nobody was interested or believed it, or for me it's important that we did that. It feels good. It's something that. It doesn't probably fit this criteria that you mentioned, So would this also mean not something that I've written or published?
Just the lesson you would leave behind, like the philosophy, the lesson, the truth. So the one is have the goals and make sure you always come back to them. Another one could be make sure you take care of your gut health.
I'm not sure if I would put that at this high level.
Sure.
It would be more like, look at the world in terms of interconnectedness.
I like that.
And base all your evaluations and decisions on that concept. And that really involves everything. That involves your health. That involves your how you interact with others, both in your family, friends, beyond, with human beings in general, with the environment, with the planet. I think that would probably be the biggest lesson.
Okay, that's 2. And number 3, truth.
Yeah, I would say live a life based on this concept of eudaimonia, that don't fall into the trap that you think material happiness will give you what humans are searching for.
Right. Eudaimonia?
Eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. What does that mean?
It means these two forms of happiness. So the material happiness that is, possessing things, increasing your wealth, based on yourself, the benefit of yourself. So the eudaimonia is believe in the higher meaning, which means making other people happy, spread happiness and contentment. There's many examples that people have studied this principle, and again, it's good. It's good for your own well-being. It's good for your body, for your immune system, as we know.
To be altruistic, to be of service to something greater.
Yeah.
More than to how do I gain as much for me? How do I collect as many things for me?
Yeah, and we live in a city, obviously, that completely believes in hedonism and enriching yourself more and more and building bigger and bigger homes and bigger and bigger cars and more expensive cars. It's sort of hard to maintain that belief in a society like that where it's surrounded, and particularly for younger people that are more susceptible to this concept. And I think it comes with age that you believe more and more that there's another way to happiness. It's not hedonism. It's this eudaimonia concept.
That's cool. I love these. I've got one final question for you. Before I ask the final question, Dr. Mayer, I want to acknowledge you for the incredible commitment and dedication you've had on this research and this science of the gut-brain connection, because I just feel like over the last 4 decades, America in general and the world has gotten sicker and sicker. Has relied more and more on medications to heal something as opposed to going to the root. And by you studying what are the root causes of inflammation and disease and all these things from the gut, something that we really never understood until in the last couple of decades, is really inspiring. So I acknowledge you for your commitment to this solution, to understanding this complex system, which I'm assuming is still scratching the surface on what we really know about it. So thank you for doing the work. Thank you for putting yourself out there and starting to talk about this. Thank you for writing the books. And thanks for everything. It's inspiring.
Well, thanks for this opportunity. I owe you a lot. I mean, your life is an inspiration when you read it, and your success in life. And I'm sure, the happiness that you have gotten out of the path that you have chosen. So it's a real honor, to be interviewed by you.
I appreciate it. Final question for you. Also, they can follow you on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Emeran Mayer over there, Emeran Mayer over on all of those places. So make sure to check you out over there. Where are you most active? What platform?
I would say at the moment it's Instagram.
Okay, Instagram. Emeran Mayer over on Instagram. So make sure to check out your Instagram for more information. You also have a website?
The other one is the website, emeranmayer.com. So when you go there, you can sign up for our newsletter, which comes out twice a month, and an email on the alternate weeks, where we pick topics related to the wider topic, brain, gut, microbiome, the concept of One Health that we didn't talk about today, but that I believe, health is something that's not just in our body, but it's health of the planet, really.
Of course, absolutely.
So, if you go to the website, you'll find a lot of information and ways to connecting.
EmeranMayer.com.
Yeah.
Gotcha, okay. Amazing. Final question is, what's your definition of greatness?
Wow. He certainly... This interview was sort of backloaded with the most challenging questions coming at the end. What's the definition of greatness? Probably a very subjective thing. things that you do to realize your potential, I would say, to the fullest extent, which will involve all these other things that we talked about today. So the belief that you have the ability to do great things, and that takes as a core belief that you think you believe in yourself, that no obstacle is big enough to prevent you from getting there, and that you take any setbacks as temporary setbacks, and you're resilient as these ecosystems that we talked about,
Sure.
and always bounce back and move to a higher level. So I think that to me is...
It's greatness. Dr. Mayer, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Inspiring.
Thank you, Louis. It was great.
Amazing.
The old narrative 10 years ago was that if you're feeling depressed, just smile. Well, if that worked,
Right.
we would have a lot less depression than we see out there.
Right.